Hello, this is Rick Harnish. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to have a joint webinar with the Mineta Transportation Institute. One of the great pleasures I have in life is to arrive in a new city by high-speed train and walk out of the station directly into a lively and active city. We haven't done that much in this country lately. But we're working on it in California, and that's why we're really excited. It doesn't happen organically, so you need to have a strong plan in order to make this work right, and we don't have much experience in doing it in this country, but we're going to be doing it in California, and so I'm excited today to learn about what San Jose is preparing to do in order to take advantage of the great increase in volume of people who will be arriving in their city on foot and not in car. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen Philbrick, who is the head of the Mineta Transportation Institute, and hear about a really fantastic program in San Jose. Thank you, Karen.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure to work with the High Speed Rail Alliance to achieve our shared vision for the future. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick. I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University, and I'm delighted that you all joined us today for a critical discussion beyond the tracks, high-speed rail station access and development. By way of background, the Mineta Transportation Institute leads 4 competitively selected multi-university consortia, all focused on improving the mobility of people and goods. Our mission is to increase mobility by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's system. We accomplish our goals through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. And I am delighted today to join you for today's webinar. I'm going to take us on an expert-led exploration of the world of multimodal high-speed rail stations and the future of passenger transportation. We need to know how to best plan, design, and develop mixed-use station areas and multimodal passenger facilities so we can achieve that vision of a seamless and integrated travel experience. With that in mind, we're going to explore solutions together, and we're going to shift today's experts who will be presenting from their unique perspectives. Welcome Eric Eidlin. He's the station planning manager for the city of San Jose. He's here to share his wealth of experience in high-speed rail and intermodal facility planning. He's been the planning manager for the city since 2017, and he's a leader in helping us to transform Diridon Station into the world-class multimodal hub that it will be in the future. In fact, the busiest train station west of the Mississippi once fully built out. Now, by way of background, Eric has studied best practices in Europe as a Cities Fellow of the German Marshall Fund. He also served as a technical advisor for station development for the California High-Speed Rail Authority. And fun fact and tiny drum roll, he's actually a faculty member in our Masters of Science in Transportation Management program, where he teaches intercity and high-speed rail planning and design. Now, my team is going to drop a link to that master's program into the chat because it's the best value in the entire nation. For less than $14,000, you too can earn your advanced degree, taking only 1 course per quarter. And in 2 years, you'll be the proud recipient of a Master's of Science in Transportation Management. So following Eric, we're going to hear from Ramses Madou, our second expert. He's the Division Manager of Planning, Policy, and Sustainability at the Department of Transportation, also with the City of San Jose. He leads a vast team of planners, engineers, policy specialists, and other experts to plan transportation in the 10th largest city in our nation. But before joining the city, he was the Associate Director of Parking and Transportation Services at Stanford University, where he worked for 10 years. Now, I could go on, but I'm going to stop there because it's time to hear from our experts. Eric, take it away.
Really, really pleased to be here. So I'm going to start with with some big picture comments from all of my past work on the topic of high-speed rail and rail generally. I'm sorry, my screen is taking a second to catch up to me here. So I think, right off the bat, it's important to think about, what's the purpose of high-speed rail? Okay, sorry about that. So high-speed rail has some specific advantages over other transportation modes. And I actually see many from my class in the audience. So hello to all of you. And you've all seen this diagram. So really high-speed rail is great for medium distance travel. So in the 100 to 500 mile range. So trips that are a little bit too far to effectively accomplish by car. I mean, you can do them, of course, but it starts to get pretty long. But they're not quite long enough that it makes more sense to hop into a plane. And then the other key point here to think about is, where these trips are originating from and going to. So high-speed rail is really best for central city to central city travel. This graphic just shows you in red the amount of time you're spending in your actual your inner city mode. And as many of us have known and thought about, the plane trip, let's say from San Francisco to LA is quite short, but you spend a lot of time getting to and from the airports, going through security. So that's really the competitive advantage of high-speed rail. As Rick sort of started to allude to at the beginning, though, there are many preconditions, for this. And, in our context, of course, we appreciate we are a much more spread out country, much more auto-oriented. So that's really where a lot of the work lies for us. So I think, just at a very fundamental level, when we think about cities, right? Cities, the reason cities exist, right, is that they bring people, goods, and services closer together, right? And by doing that, they facilitate exchange and economic transactions, social transactions. So with that in mind, train stations can really help cities do what they do best. Okay, and so there are many examples I like to show. This is an aerial view of the Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. So I think, looking at this just sort of objectively, you see this train station in the middle of a very dense, old, built-up city, and almost 500,000 people pass through here on a daily basis, right? Think of how much space you would need to do that with cars or airplanes. And actually looking to Asia, I'm less of an expert on Asia, but certainly, here at Shibuya Station, 2 million people pass through this small area on a daily basis. So hard to imagine another transportation mode that can accommodate that many people on such little space, right? The other point I like to make is, if you design these facilities well, with the specific advantages of rail and high-speed rail in mind, you can do this kind of thing, right? Where the rail infrastructure sits harmoniously within the urban fabric. From an economic development perspective, these numbers are pretty stark. So this is Lyon-Pardieu station. This is the most important station in France outside of Paris. In last year, or it was 2022, 45 million people passed through the station on a daily basis. Sorry, in the year. I'm sorry about that. And the airport, which is outside of the city, maybe about 15 miles or so, it accommodated 8.5 million people, so only about 1/5. And the high-speed rail and rail station occupies only 1/12 of the land. So if you do the math here, we're talking about 65 times the passenger throughput and 10 times the jobs and economic development per unit of land area. So if you take, 1 square mile, well, it's less than a square mile, it's just much more productive. So again, that's why train stations are really compatible with cities and dense cities in particular. So here's the image of the freeway, and I think you get the point here. Another real pearl that I've heard in interviewing folks, mostly in Europe, is that great stations facilitate mobility across scales, right? You know, train stations exist to provide intercity rail access. That's a given. But the station that just does that is really perhaps missing the mark. So there are a few ways in which great stations facilitate mobility across scales because there are different scales. So the first is by prioritizing connections between the highest capacity modes, so the transit modes in particular. This is perhaps one of the simplest. This is Erfurt in the former East Germany, where the main mode of local transit passes directly underneath the high-speed and intercity rail tracks. And it's just a 30-second escalator ride to connect. So super simple. Seems like this is, of course, how you would do it. It is surprisingly rare, the number of instances, though, in the world, and especially in our context where this is done. At a bigger scale, Berlin Main Station shows the same principle, but in a much grander and complex way. In this station, under one roof, you have a whole series of national east-west rail lines as well as regional rail lines. This is the S-Bahn here, a bit like a BART train. And then you have a similar set of rail lines underneath going the north-south. So within this route, under one roof, you've got just this incredible number of connections. And by the way, also, you'll see all this passenger serving retail. So as you're making this transfer, there'll be maybe a convenient shop for you to pick up your dry cleaning, maybe get a cup of coffee. So really pretty impressive what they did with a very holistic, integrated approach. And I think that's the key message I think we'll come back to in the Q&A. Lyon, I've already mentioned this station, the first city to be connected to Paris by high-speed rail in France. This shows a shot from 2020 there. It's been so successful, they are redeveloping the whole station area. And the big point here, and this sort of points to perhaps what Rick was alluding to at the beginning. The former station in the early 80s, before high-speed rail existed, was here on this peninsula. As you can imagine, if you're a station in the middle of the country, France in this case, you don't want to be a stub end station. So stub end meaning you have to go in and then back out. So they actually moved their main station about a mile to the northeast, to the site of a former military base, and at the same time made that the central node in their regional transit network. So the key thing here is, for a train station, congestion, bringing as many people into that point is a good thing. Whereas with roads and so on, you just typically want to disperse, right? So anyway, but it also shows the huge amount of government interaction, to make that happen, to bring all the parties together to make that really pretty huge shift. Okay. Another way in which, a little simpler, in which stations facilitate mobility across scales is to prioritize sustainable and space-efficient local access modes. Very simply, the pedestrian, the bike, but also the scooter, right? This is a photo I took of Amsterdam main station, where they fit in this really first-rate bike connection along the edge of here. Here they are building it. They actually had to fill a little bit over top of the River Eye here. There was not enough land, as you may know, the Netherlands is the densest country in Europe. But in the grand scheme of things, I put on here creativity from constraints. This is the best solution that they found to accommodate this really critical bike link, which is a way to access the station, but also a way to connect through the station. The busiest station in the Netherlands is in the city of Utrecht. This slide has some key data. So 300,000 people pass through the station on a daily basis. They have only 500 car parking spaces, but 25,000 bike parking spaces. And this brings me to the next point, which relates more to the connection to the urban development. You see this huge transportation facility is just a stone's throw from this quaint medieval city with a lot of compact development. So, the same point I made earlier about Paris and Gare Saint-Lazare, there aren't really other modes that can bring this number of people into a city center while requiring so little space. Okay, the next point is it's related to that one, so that we need to think not just about the intercity rail passenger, but many of the great stations in the world, the station itself is designed to connect across the tracks. We talk about the other side of the tracks, right? And rail does divide neighborhoods if you don't design it well. In this case, in Lyon, I've already mentioned, 30,000 people who use the station aren't rail passengers. And I argue this is a function that we need to plan for and embrace up front. And that is very much the case. This is a rendering of a future station supposed to be completed later this year, actually in time for the Olympics in Paris, of the Saint-Denis-Pleyel station, where they talk about la gare connectrice in French, which means the connecting station. So a bridge station. So the design of the station itself is a bridge. Okay, next point is related to all of this, really, which is that station projects are city building projects. And also, when we think about the station is, rail stations exist, as I said earlier, to provide access to other cities, right? But really, we don't care how far people are coming from to access the station. Well, we do, actually, we prefer for them not to be coming from very, very far away, actually. So we want to maximize dense development right around the station area, and we want it to be done in a way that's really compatible. Just don't have a lot of time, but some really important examples: the city of the northern French city of Lille, where when high-speed rail was built between Paris and London and Brussels, this became a central crossroads. And really, with the coordinated economic development planning that went into the station, really reversed the city's economic fortunes. It was really sort of like a Rust Belt city for France in the 80s, and that its fortunes were reversed with this, and an orientation toward tourism and the tertiary sector. And I will also just again mention this case of Lyon because it's a very important one. It's the biggest, the most important station outside of Paris. And you can see the city fabric, other than the station area, which is here. It's these sort of compact, 5-6 story kind of walk-up buildings. But this was the place, former military base, as I mentioned. They were able to really pack in a lot of economic activity, a lot of development right around the station, making the station more useful, and just getting a greater return on investment for the public investment in high-speed rail and other rail. I'm going to wrap up pretty soon here, but I'll also say great stations are destinations in and of themselves. They're not just a place for people to board trains and buy tickets. And coincidentally also, and this is something we are working on in San Jose, many are examples of bold adaptive reuse. So historic buildings that get redone. Actually, this is the photo from my background here, Antwerp Central Station in Belgium. Absolutely, stunning historic structure that with the introduction of high-speed rail, this whole area around it was excavated. So you see, this is the view I just showed you. And so this is an important stop on the Thalys between, that's the train between Paris and Amsterdam. London Bridge Station, this is one we're looking at it at Dieradon because of the elevated structure we like. Fully redesigned here. Underneath the tracks is a really pretty pleasant retail environment with, in this case, some pretty high-end retail. And this really pretty impressive example in Strasbourg, you can see the historic building, which was it became too small for the city, especially with high-speed rail. And so they preserved it, but, created this glass bubble around it, creating more interior space. Strasbourg has can be a pretty harsh climate in the winter. So anyway, this was the approach. Okay, so and just very quickly, making stations central to people's daily lives is also a really important thing. These has like Amazon sort of drop boxes, kind of thing. But daycare. So before I turn over to Ramses, in California and along the future Brightline, a wide range of stations. So the applicability of what I just talked about, the lessons are different. So we've got some more center city stations, these ones. We've got, in urban areas, but a little bit farther away. And then we've got some are airport stations, and then we've got some more ex-urban ones. In San Jose Diridon, I'll just say, these are pretty much the lessons and worded a little bit differently than I just said. We are trying to apply a lot of these lessons. So, making the station a connector, facilitating convenient connections. And we can talk about this more. And so to my mind, this is the direction for San Jose to accommodate a lot more people, economic development without a really negative impact on the urban environment. Some of you might have seen this drawing recently. So yeah, the main lessons, I think, rail and supportive modes have an enduring importance for cities. Great stations facilitate mobility across scales. And we can get into this in the Q&A. You really need to focus on the station first to make those connections happen, to have great urban connections and so on. And then also it's important to note that a lot of these projects, like we're realizing in San Jose, they are bigger than we are. This project is located in San Jose, but for them to work in the way they really need to as facilities that facilitate mobility across the state and the region, we need strategic involvement of the upper levels of government and not just funding. But I'll leave it at that. And now I'm going to turn over to Ramses, who's going to talk a little bit more about the work we're doing in San Jose in this area specifically, and also citywide, not just at the station.
Great, thanks, Eric. Some great thoughts there, and I'm going to be building on some of the themes that Eric brought up. I'm going to be focusing more on the last mile connection and how we in the team that is thinking about Diridon Station are getting into what it means to design a transportation environment kind of throughout the station, but also connecting into it. And I wanted to start off with a couple thoughts on who's our customer. This is a somewhat new question given what we're doing here. In transit, first and last mile, a lot of times we think about kind of the immediate area around the station, maybe going out a mile. That's what it was originally thought of, but going a bit further, right? But with high-speed rail, you're really crossing a new line, right? You're really building a new type of customer for at least the Western United States. Of course, in Europe and Asia, as Eric is pointing out, this has been there for a long time. And to some degree on the East Coast, you have some big connections like this already. But we are on the West Coast, this is very new for us, right? Is thinking about transit stations that have high-speed rail connecting to them. You're really looking at a different type of passenger and their relationship to the overall environment and what they're trying to do with that trip is very different, right? So if you look at what the trips that come in and out of San Jose, so this is a map of the Bay Area showing the density of trips coming in and out of San Jose. This is a credit to Jane McFarland from UC Berkeley, who made this map for us. When you're looking at local transit, if you're just looking at bus or commuter rail, you're really looking at a smaller catchment area. But with these high-speed rail connections, you're really looking at a huge catchment area and trying to make sure that we're meeting the customer's needs when we're thinking about where else they need to go, they're coming from to get to the station or leaving the station, becomes a different problem. And then there's another layer of who our customer is, right? So you really think about the passenger first, and I really extol every planner to think about the real customer of every transportation mode is the people using it. Sometimes we get lost in institutional needs and things like that. I'll try to repeat that as much as possible. But there is institutional customers, right? And so we are I work for the city of San Jose, so does Eric. We have a lot of very local needs, right? We're really thinking about that immediate area around the station and how its development is going to impact everything from land use to transportation needs to economic development to park needs, all that kind of stuff, right? And then you get out to this regional and state piece that, regional you already kind of have with Caltrain or commuter rail. And then you bring in state needs with high-speed rail, right? This system is intended to go from San Francisco all the way to LA and hopefully beyond at some point. And so we're really bringing in institutional needs across that. And then as Eric already brought up, making sure that those state level folks are involved in helping us think it through. And then for us in San Jose, as well as in Millbrae and some other places, this high-speed rail network is actually going to be connecting into our air network as well. We're looking at building an airport connector at the moment in San Jose from Diridon to our airport, specifically to make Diridon and the airport feel like the same facility. And so we're bringing in this other level of interest when we do this. Now, one thing I really want to say is when we're thinking about last mile planning and what it means to support high-speed rail passengers, it's really a team sport. This is a graphic from the work we do on the Diridon station redesign, and I've added a few more partners here, but this is only some of the partners we need to bring together to make sure that all of the services are working together, that passenger connections are working well, that administrations are talking to each other to make sure that services, time schedules, all of these kinds of things work together. And so if you're looking at doing last mile planning for stations and bringing folks in, you really need to make sure you have the right partners there and bring all of the voices together to create something productive. Now, going into what it means to do this kind of planning, right? What are we trying to accomplish? All stations are, as Eric was pointing out earlier, are city building projects. High-speed rail is even more because of its a capacity to bring so many people in. And really taking time to make sure that the local, regional, state, and beyond goals are being brought into the conversation, and that the vision of what's happening is being thought about constantly. And so here I have on the upper left-hand part of the screen, City of San Jose's mode share goals, meaning how many people will walk, bike, take transit versus take a car. And you can see the dark portion of or I should say the light or blue portion of those graphs is the amount of trips we want to see in non-automobile modes. And you can see it's a huge jump. And to be able to accomplish that, we need to go from what we see in a lot of stations now. The car park here is from the Concord BART station into a more multimodal integrated station, as we see in the image over here. Now, Eric has already talked a lot about stations and kind of how they're shaped and what kind of impact they can have. But when we're thinking about how to make sure we as planners and station builders really get into making the station design work for passengers and work to meet the goals that the jurisdictions that are involved are trying to get in there, it's really good to start from making sure everybody is on board with how we're going to think about station access hierarchy. This is the adopted station access hierarchy for San Jose Diridon Station, where you can see that intercity and commuter rail is the primary mode, right? This is meant to be the main feeder to everything else. And after that, you can see the local downtown, and then the regional and citywide get these hierarchies. Pedestrians, need to be first to make sure that they are not being interrupted by, let's say, large flows of buses or other things like that, and the like. Right, and so really making sure everybody who's helping design the access to a station understands what we're trying to accomplish. That was the last slide, and this is kind of the implementation of that. What does it mean to do that? And I'll hit one more point. The first mile starts at the station. A lot of what it means to get people from one mode to another, from high-speed rail to San Jose State, let's say, or to Sunnyvale, or anything like that, actually happens directly in the station, right? And so making sure that the connections between the various modes in the station aren't complicated, as this graphic somewhat shows. The graphic on the left is some early modeling around the amount of passenger traffic between the various modes we're going to see at Diridon, right? And making sure that we actually have these connections planned out, right? Making sure that the pathways are easy, that wayfinding clearly gives people pathways to get to where they're going, and the like is primary to making this all work. Now, moving on kind of out of station. Now, people need to get out of the station to that larger travel shed that they're trying to get to, right? I stole Eric's chart here on the right about optimal distances for intercity movement, and found an interesting chart here that kind of shows the amount of the distance folks travel by different modes based on real world observations, mostly in the UK there, but it shows the idea that we really need to think about what modes folks are going to take to do what kinds of travel. And also, as planners, we also need to think about what modes can do these things, right? Because a lot of times when we're doing this kind of planning, we are trying to move from that car-focused world into an active and transit world. And so it's our responsibility to create the world that folks can live in. And so understanding what is possible is really important there. So next, getting into this, right? So this is a map of downtown San Jose directly around Diridon. And you can see, meant to show both, important places. We have the convention center highlighted there. We have downtown there, just above the convention center. And that half-mile loop around the station. Right, we have a lot of interest areas. Now, this is a very localized one. Of course, these places of interest go well beyond this. But the other point this map shows is there's only so much infrastructure that we can use to have people travel on, right? And we really need to think about what are the amounts of folks we're expecting to go into the various pieces of infrastructure, roadways in particular, and using that roadway space in a way that's most efficient, right? And so on the right of this is really thinking about, okay, how can we fit more people into these areas, right? Diridon Station, the immediate area around it is actually somewhat residential on the west side, and on the east side of it is a lot of industrial and low density commercial use at the moment, except for the SAP Center, of course. So how do we fit a lot more people coming in and out of this area? And thinking about capacity becomes very important. The way that San Jose has done this is we designate our roadways with certain classifications. And those classifications give primary uses to those roadways, which means that when push comes to shove and we need to make prioritization decisions, we're going to prioritize the mode that is kind of at the top of the list, right? So Santa Clara Street, for example, the red ones there, it's the top red one, is intended for transit prioritization. And so we're trying to figure out how to prioritize transit on Santa Clara Street while continuing to serve all its other modes. And actually, Eric is leading a Santa Clara Street redesign project that's just about to kick off a little bit later this year to help us think through some of those problems. I won't go through the west. I'll say one more. San Fernando Street runs right through the heart of Diridon Station, and we're going through a major rebuild of that street right now to make it truly bicycle focused and we're hoping that it would run straight through the heart of the station and connect directly into some major bike parking facilities for users of the station. While we're doing this kind of planning, access planning to stations, most of the local jurisdictions have some lots of plans to work from. This is a map of our bike plan, Diridon Station smack in the middle. I didn't get a chance to highlight it on the map. But there's a lot to think about in terms of how you're going to use your space and what you're going to do. And most jurisdictions have already done some version of this. It's a wealth of work to look at. So I showed there the overall map of the different roadways that we designate. And this map shows you a little bit more of a local versus regional connection thinking that we've done. Here on the left, we have our local bike and ped connections, which you could already see kind of showing up in that last map. But you can see that we're making sure that the routes for all types of users are well thought through, and that we're making sure that there are ample infrastructure to support those movements. And then going into the citywide and regional transit, you can see there the lines there, that the arcing line on the north side is the future BART alignment. And you can see the other regional rail pieces coming in and out of there as well. A few closing slides here. We don't yet have an integrated transit system in the Bay Area that is able to kind of make it easy for folks who are, let's say, coming from Fresno or coming from LA to kind of jump in and get across the Bay Area. I'm going back to this heat map of the total travel that happens in San Jose on a daily basis, and I'm putting up here Seamless Bay Area's vision map as a kind of show that, look, we really need this integrated transit system to really serve that larger need. And the growth that we're going to see in transit use coming into Diridon based on both BART's edition, Caltrain upgrades, and this high-speed rail edition are going to be huge. And we in the Bay Area are luckily kind of going through the growing pains of learning how to integrate this that much more. And you can really see the value of that thought when you look at this heat map. Another thing we really need to think about when we're working on all this is what the private market's role is in all of this. We've seen the growth of course, Uber and Lyft and all that. That's not very new anymore. Scooters are even becoming somewhat old, but they still play really important parts and can aid public agencies who a lot of times feel like we kind of have to provide everything. We don't. A lot of the time, that's my timer, a lot of the time we can actually work with private sector partners to develop permitting programs or space needs for these kinds of systems to come in and take these folks away. And of course, here on the left, Glideways is the company we're working on to build an airport connector and potentially other connections as well. And I'll leave hitting a very similar note as Eric. This is a illustrative development concept map for our Downtown West project, which the Alphabet and Google are looking to build downtown and is currently is entitled. If we can see this kind of land use development around a station, this increases the value, right, and becomes the last mile, right? We're putting people that much closer. We're being able to use development as the primary driver for getting people to the station. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to Karen. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and right on time. Before we launch into some of the questions that were pre-submitted and those that are posed live in the Q&A feature, I just want to sum up some of the capacity that you both discussed with a fun fact. Once the California high-speed rail system is fully built out, to have the same people carrying capacity as that high-speed rail system in the state of California, we'd have to build 4,200 new highway lane miles, 2 new airport runways, and 91 more airport gates. The cost of those infrastructure projects are twice that of the high-speed rail project, even with the increase in construction costs and inflation. And I think that's important to really highlight that capacity building effort. And that leads me to my framing question, and I'd love to hear from both of you. Compared to other transport modes, high-speed rail is highly sustainable as well as efficient. But what about the stations? Your comments are focused on station area planning. How are they being designed and implemented to minimize the environmental impact? And what role does sustainability play in the decision-making process during the development phase?
Well, I'll start. I think when we think about sustainability in stations, I think we need to think first about the function of the stations, how they fit into the context, and how they support access by more sustainable modes, and also by modes which don't force them to travel as far, right? If we have a lot going on right around the station, then people don't need to come from as far. If they're coming from another dense node within the region that is connected to that station by transit, then they're also using the sustainable modes that serve the station. And then, as I mentioned, the station is connector, right? Building our stations, so they're really tying together neighborhoods. Not just you have a door here and you can get in. No, they're really connecting across the tracks. I think that will have huge city building, but also environmental benefits. And then I'd say secondarily are the considerations about what materials you use. Do you have solar panels on the roof? Those are important things, but less fundamental than the station design access questions.
I'll just want to highlight what the kind of the theme that Eric's building there, which is the stations themselves are moments in particularly on the West Coast of us moving towards an environmental system, right? So the way that the decision making in the system, that access hierarchy is basically a sustainability statement, right? It's about what are we using the station design to support, and what are we not? Right. And as we push towards a more sustainable transportation system, the station designs themselves kind of wrap that thought around. All right, what types of modes are we supporting? What types of connections are we spending public dollars to make? Right. And so it's that that's the most important part. Right.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I am going to read verbatim a question that was actually posed by MTI's visiting scholar from Denmark, Jackson Sakazi, and he says, what institutional mechanisms are in place to, 1, foster public and private cooperation in station area development, and 2, to safeguard against poor performance, including cost overruns and schedule delays of prerequisite infrastructure development projects? So kind of a two-part thorny question there. Which one of you would like to answer that live?
I can start. So I didn't talk that much about our current phase of work on Diridon Station, but we're doing a business case, which is at its core a cost benefit exercise. So in our, actually pre-pandemic, we came up with that visual that I showed, which is a vision, a spatial vision of what we wanted to do. Now with the business case, we're really trying to get a little bit more real. So that concept tried to respond to a lot of goals, goals in the areas of transportation, city building, economic development. We want to make sure, is that the most affordable, sensible way to achieve those goals? Because that's what we care about, is our goals, right? So we're comparing that, we're refining it, seeing what options we have to maybe make it less expensive, but also to decouple it from other expensive projects, like that concept had as we designed it initially, we needed to move our Caltrain's maintenance facility as part of it. So as you can see, that's a mega project in and of itself. So we're trying to tease that apart. And but in terms of your second part of your question, I think, I think that's where this strategic involvement by the upper levels of government that I referred to, that's important. It's important, and actually I'll give a shout out to Spur here and Laura Tolkoff. They published a report. I was on the steering committee for that, More for Less, a few years ago, where if you have at the right level of government, a level of government that sees multiple projects of the same nature, then we can do, and I'm sure you're familiar with this idea of reference class forecasting, right? It's not, you look at other similar projects, and it's your estimate is not just the best case scenario of what can happen, but you actually look at similar projects that have been built, and then you come up with your cost estimate. So those are some of the ideas, very briefly, I think that need to be incorporated. But on the second, I will be honest, we are not very far along in those areas, and I do think we would appreciate involvement from both the region and actually I would think the state on the project delivery and governance questions.
And I'll take on that first part of the question, which is the public-private cooperation. First, it's land use. That last slide I showed you was this Downtown West project, and the development process for that project was heavily had heavy communication between what we were doing for the Diridon station designs, early versions of that, and the station planning that we could do at that point, and the development itself. And so that making sure that we're having projects talk to each other, and the consultants working for Downtown West project, the consultants working for the city, there was a lot of conversation about how do we make these things work? How do we make sure that land use is actually supportive of the train station? How do we make sure the train station is supportive of the land use, right? And that's really great. And then I'll also bring up the airport connector project. The airport connector project is supposed to connect into the airport and go straight to Terminal B at San Jose Madou Airport. And there we're using a public-private partnership to develop the project from the ground up. I know we want to keep moving here, so I'll just say quickly what we've done in that project is use a pre-development agreement to align the ultimate success of the project with the profit motive of the private market and the needs of the public. So we're both from the beginning kind of invested in this project, really driving as much ridership as possible.
Very good. Thank you both. And you highlighted something important, Ramses, which is we have only 8 minutes left. We have 12 open questions, 9 that were submitted in advance. So I apologize to those of you who have posed a question we won't be able to get to, but I invite you to send the Institute your question in an email, and we will see if we can give you a response. One quick moderator's benefit for being in this role. Hi, Dad. I'm so glad you joined us for this exciting topic today. Okay, next question. We have 27 transit agencies in the Bay Area alone among our 9 counties and 101 cities. So we had a question from Stuart Chesler. Are you planning to have integrated regional fare, like a universal fare card or something else to break down barriers for using a seamless system?
We in San Jose are very supportive of motions towards that. We're really happy to see what's happening at the regional level, where there is work by the transit agencies to integrate in that fashion. We see Diridon Station as one of the poster children for why this is so important. You saw that slide I had of this is a team sport. Did you notice how many transit agencies were involved? Those are all serving one station. And right now at Diridon, there are multiple ticket machines that anybody who's not a transit aficionado can easily get lost in. It can be a confusing, difficult environment, and makes it, when you get on the road with your car, whether your highway is run by the state or expressway, or it's a federal highway, you don't know the difference, and it should be the same on transit. So we're highly supportive of that. We as the city only have so much power in that process, but we are always on the side of seeing more integration in the operations of transit.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in, so this fragmentation that Karen you're referring to,
Yes.
where does it come to a head the most? it's at your hub stations, right? That's where you have multiple operators sharing space. I'll go back again to Rick's great comment at the beginning. Like these stations, they do not design themselves. Like that image of Berlin Main Station, that is an incredibly complex, multidisciplinary project that does not design itself. But because of the way we're set up, stations tend to be afterthoughts. We build BART to San Jose, we'll electrify Caltrain service, but the station is treated, oh, we'll get to that station and then things will figure themselves out. People will leave their cars at home. But no, these really convenient connections, having that really superb station environment, that requires a conscious effort. I call it a station first approach that also requires somebody with that regional perspective, regional or statewide perspective. And again, that's sort of going back to my point about the need for more strategic involvement from the region and the state.
And Eric, I do believe that your additional response addressed Arnold Castman's question that he posed about good ways to connect stations that are located outside the central business district and how we increase support for that. So very, very, very important. And then we've had so many great questions. So Eric, this one is for you. How will Diridon Station be redeveloped into an intermodal hub to accommodate all these transit agencies? You kind of touched on that. And in our Q&A, Walt Allen, who's one of the graduates of our program, also suggested that you consider adding SMART to the Bay Area rail connections. So kind of combine two things.
Yeah, I think on the last one, I think he meant just the graphic that Ramses showed, but the graphic, that's a good point. The graphic that Ramses showed was Diridon centric, and SMART doesn't connect at Diridon, so I think that was the reason why it wasn't included, but definitely a good point.
Perfect.
I mean, just very briefly, I would say, how are we? I mean, we're trying to implement a lot of those key lessons that I went through in my presentation at Diridon, and I would say the challenge in doing that well, or part of it, well, there's funding, of course. We're doing a very complex, expensive project, and we actually don't currently have a lead entity to lead that work. I didn't get into that in detail, but you think of the Lyon example or the Lille example. Those projects did not happen on their own, and they also didn't happen with a disjointed organizational structure. They had very strong involvement by the upper levels of government and a governance entity for the station and the surrounding district, the station district, that you can do some financing, helps you, well, with a bigger land area, not just the station, but a little bit around there. You have space to solve spatial challenges. You have maybe land that you can tax in a certain way. You can do tax increment. So those are some of the next things we're trying to, we're working as part of our current phase of work with Diridon. We are working on, so developing a more efficient organizational and governance structure.
And that's a comment we've heard kind of repeatedly, needing that collaboration, that working together model at all levels to achieve success. Okay, we only have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to jump to another question here for you both. We're talking about innovation. We're talking about emerging technologies. Part of that conversation is advanced air mobility and other things we have not yet prepared for. How might these emerging technologies and advancement influence the future of high-speed rail? And what considerations should planners specifically keep in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes, it is.
And it's one that's both. I think there's multiple things. One, the shiny is fun to play with, but until it's real, it's not, right? And we have to be really careful. Elon Musk has done some incredible things to the world, but has also diverted attention from some important projects by making factually completely incorrect claims about the ways that projects can be made. And so we have to be really careful with this space. I actually run the Emerging Mobility Group also in the city of San Jose and deal a lot with advanced aerial mobility. We're doing the project, the airport connector, for example, is a personal rapid transit system with 4 passenger buggies being the primary transit vehicle that is being looked at. that would have hundreds of those running. And so I think what you have to do as from a public perspective is you have to do your due diligence. The flim flam excitement hype cycles are very, very loud in our society right now around new technology and their ability to kind of change everything. And some of them will. But honestly, we haven't seen ones that will fundamentally change the dynamics yet. And we always have to be open to them. And I think that's the important part, right? Will advanced aerial mobility need a place at future train stations? Yeah, it's likely if that technology truly finds purchase in the market and can actually carry a lot of people, right? And so I think the primary piece you need to do is do the true due diligence, right? Which is how much can this actually carry? Who will it benefit, right? Because a lot of these new systems are so expensive up front. And they make these audacious equity claims. The AAM market, advanced aerial mobility in particular, keeps saying, "Oh, we're going to help, democratize transportation." But you're really going to have to prove that you can make a flying device, cost something similar that anybody but high-level executives can really afford in any kind of particular way. So caution plus due diligence can equal incredible change. But that due diligence is the primary piece for the public side to get through.
So we are cautiously optimistic, but we are charging full force towards success. Okay, Ramses, one last question, 20-second response, please. Somebody submitted this in relation to on your last mile slides. When is the forecast date to start and complete this project?
For Diridon in general, or the?
I would say the high-speed rail project's very not a station development, but it was not more specific than that.
I will not speak to high-speed rail's overall schedule. We're hoping for sooner than later. I believe 2036 is the year that's in my head, but honestly, I may be spouting incorrect information, so I should.
And to that end, we invite the guest who posed that question to visit the California High-Speed Rail Authority website. They will have that information very clearly labeled, as well as their business plan and their other forecast. That's a bit outside of today's content, but we appreciate the question. And with that, I'm sorry to say our time has come to a close. I'd like to thank all of our presenters and, of course, Rick Harnish, our co-host. Many of you asked, and I am confirming this webinar has been recorded. An email will be sent later today with a link to the slides as well as to the video, and it will be posted on our website. One last plug for an upcoming technology transfer event before we close today's program. Please join us on February 6th at 10 a.m. Pacific time for Putting on the Brakes on Rider Harassment, Research Tools, Community Partnerships, and Data-Driven Solutions. This is incredibly important and one of the foremost conversations in transit. We're co-hosting this free virtual webinar that provides professional development hours with Stop AAPI Hate. It's a discussion with 2 transit operators and their community partners to discuss strategies for learning what riders are facing and how we can put an end to it. Taking on harassment doesn't need to be a daunting task. Starts with data collection and setting up the partnerships to guide the process. You don't want to miss this. If you'd like to register for the event, see the link in the chat. It's also on our website. And with that, Rick, turning it over to you for a call for action with our last 90 seconds.
Great. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you for arranging this. I learned a lot about how complicated this is and how these work. And I've been to a number of those stations that you used the examples in Europe and even learned a lot about those from this. And Lyon is one very interesting case. One of the things you talked about that ties very much into our themes is the lead entity and the proper level of government to get things done. I continue to be surprised about how far along California is in so many different rail projects. But if we're going to have that kind of success truly work in California and spread that success across the country, we need a true federal railway program that invests across states and takes leads on multi-state projects. So I hope the audience will be excited about this, all of you, and get engaged in making sure that we continue to build strong support for federal railway program and state railway programs in your home state. Thank you again, Karen, for setting this up. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you all to participating. And we'll continue to work forward to get more of this across the country.